Hi everyone! In the previous program, we were with Matías De Stefano. He brought a very disruptive and highly evolved idea of ontocracy. And today, we're going to continue delving into that. Are you ready?
It would be possible that our Argentina, a completely divided country and with many of its inhabitants migrating to the abroad, became the best place to live in just 4 years. It may seem almost impossible. But today, my friend Luciano Mandli invites us to create together that reality.
Well, we continue with Matías De Stefano. Mati, I was thinking about being able to reflect a country as a body, no? And the biology of a body that can self-regulate, that is regulated only by each autonomous cell that knows what they have to do, and the body works in excellence. A new idea now that has been talked about a lot here in Argentina, a liberal idea. However, that liberal part of freedom, is it really a fundamental freedom, or is it a freedom in mechanism? Because I say, if we are going to generate, if a freedom in mechanisms is generated, I think out loud, if a freedom in mechanisms is generated by people do not have the ability and practice to be who they want to be, that has to do with what we talked about in the previous program about education, the ability to be whoever they want to be and be able to transform, play, and create the life they dream of. If it is not accompanied by that education with something very consistent, in some way, it would not be fundamentally liberal, right? And it fails, because it would go against its own principle. In a way, it would go against its own principle? Yes, exactly. Because freedom is something that an individual builds and not a political system. So what is needed is, so the political system can be a channel, but for an awakening of consciousness of the population. So the liberal idea could be a bridge to, it could be a transition for ontocracy. It could be a transition, but accompanied by, yes, the situation is that the theme of the libertarian political movements is like a 17-year-old who emancipates and leaves his parents' house, right? So we can say that previous policies from the 40s, the 20s, policies that started being created with capitalism, with socialism, what they did was become mom and dad. If we think about it biologically, for a nation, they are called mom and dad, who would be nation and government, mom and dad. So, the mom being more the social, and dad being more the capitalism, because biologically he is the one who's going to look for a project and the other is the one that contains it. The mother is more of the feminine role, exactly. Socialist is more of containment, of empathy, yes. And the father, capitalism and productivity, and fighting whoever remains afterwards, the father or the son. Yes, they're putting us in the dilemma, is it dad or mom? We're basically in a divorce. We're children in the middle of a divorce in which we have to choose between mom and dad. Mom who won't let us go out because she's afraid of losing us, and dad who wants us to leave, right? And we can create the life we dream of. Do what you want, but I don't want to take care of you. It's like, so there's that mom and dad thing in the energy. But this is not only here. It's in all countries. It's in the whole world, right? But both positions also have a beautiful part, their reason of being. They are mom and dad, of course. They have their inevitable reason for being, and that will always be there. It's not something that has to be eliminated. Like, in order to emancipate myself, I don't kill my parents, right? I mean, I'm not going to kill the father like in Greek mythology or the mother. So it is not killing them, it is resignifying them. When the son emancipates, freedom when he is emancipated, he can ask mom and dad for advice on what it is like to live. But if I leave and do my own thing because I do not tolerate mom and dad, then maybe I will not know what to do, and I'm going to have a very bad time because I don't have a point of reference. So it would be different if mom, dad, son sit down and do therapy, right? So it would be different if mom says, look, what I want in my life is this. Dad, what I want in my life is this. And the son says, what I want is this. Good. How can we make it so that the three of them coexist? How can we make it so that those who are depending on mom can live with mom and those who are dependent on dad can live with dad and still be free to be able to do their own projects? For that, you need therapy, not to eliminate one to be able to replace it with another. And in practice, therapy today in a country, what would it be? Education. But not teaching, as I said before. Not teaching, but education. And what is needed? They will kill me for this. But we must transform the entire system from the teaching to the teachers. In other words, it cannot be that people who educate are not educated. It cannot be that they are not perfecting themselves, that they do not have a global vision of the world, that they do not have a philosophy, not the philosophy of a philosopher, but the philosophy of self-questioning all the time. That is the true philosophy. Not the one who reads a book and applies the law of that book, but who constantly asks who I am, why do I do this, why do I want this, why? The basis of the questions is fundamental in the teaching profession. So teaching needs to be a more important career than law or medicine. It needs to have a very high level, very demanding, high level of personal growth, and that is not studying history or this or that. It could be doing ayahuasca. It is to do an ayahuasca ceremony, go inwards, meditation, yoga, going to a psychologist, yes, personal leadership, emotions, exactly. A lot needs to be done. There are so many therapies and so many things that can be done that if the teachers did this process for 5 years, 7-year-olds would have no problems. And they would be transforming the world. Tremendous. Now, Matias, in this matter of education and practice, ideas or considerations are already beginning to appear. Not ideas, but I have already begun to hear people who are already considering, what if there were no more schools? Sounds strong, but it is already related. We have functioned like this for thousands of years, of course. No school does not mean no education, and more in a world where we all have access to information. And it is also a mechanism where the elderly could have a direct relationship with education and practice, that is, with so much experience, and it could be self-sustaining. That is ontocratic. The last ones who are at the end of the life restart giving their experience to the first ones. That is something cyclical. That was always like that. When did it change? With the Industrial Revolution, of course. At the time of the Industrial Revolution, the school appears as a solution to all the parents and grandparents who were working. When the grandparents could no longer work, they were social discard. So we will give them a little something to support themselves and do what they can, but the parents had to work. So where could they leave the children who did not know how to work? In a place called Skole, which was the military school in Greek times, and it was called Skole, so they said, well, we're going to prepare them militarily for the factories. So the idea of school comes from a totally wrong concept. The school was actually a public space called Agora, where people would go to learn and ask philosophers questions. Ah, tremendous. It was not a place where there was first grade, second grade, third grade. Those things did not exist. Where did that exist? In the factory, where they began to put together an education based on what happened in the 18th century. So, us today with the internet, it can be possible that a 15-year-old boy is studying something that will never be useful to him in his life, with a piece of paper and a pencil, and all that is perfect and all, but he has internet access. There you have it all. He has internet access. A 3-year-old knows how to navigate the internet and Google. The way to assimilate information today is in 360 degrees, not looking at the blackboard, of course. So the information does not enter only by going to school. School is obsolete, of course. But what happens is it holds space on the factory. So if we keep talking about the worker is a horrible world that comes from the tripalium, a three-pronged whip, which was what the Romans used to hit the slaves. Terrible. So the worker, what is the right of the worker? To stay a slave, basically. So in reality, the entrepreneur, the one who undertakes a path, the one who undertakes a project, not the worker, is beginning to see a trend of entrepreneurship. Exactly, because we ask ourselves again, what do I want to do in my life? Because before it was, what does society need from me that is part of a social group? This is called democracy. And democracy kills the individual. It strengthens the group, but destroys personal consciousness. It destroys the being, of course. So religion took care of killing the ego, and society took care of killing the being. So I and am both destroyed by the religious system and the political system. Out of necessity. It was not for something bad. It is not that someone sat down and said we're going to do this with people. Not at all. Simply because of a need of the moment that we were not aware of. But now that we're awakening the consciousness and asking, what do I want to do with life? Who am I? What do I contribute with all this? Is it necessary to live like this? What do I believe in? When I stop being certain and I start to ask myself questions, consciousness arises. In front of a blackboard, it is very difficult to ask yourself a question. It is very difficult when you're told silence. You don't have an opinion. Yes, of course. In looking at all the possibilities of seeing the real world and executing what you would want to leave in the world, because somehow connecting with what do I want to do? What do I like to do? Being able to perform in that. Today in school, it is very difficult to be able to train and be able to do so. But everything is very connected. Doing homeschooling, as they call it today on the planet, studying at home implies that parents also need to feel qualified for that. But not all parents are trained for that. That's why there are tutors, teachers, professors that exist for that. But the problem is that these people are financed by the state, and that state by a government, and that government by an idea, of course. So the problem is the idea, of course. That's why it wouldn't be bad news that the parents are not capable of educating them. I mean, there is a community. There are resources. There are other people who can support each other. Yes, it is possible. What happens is that school is seen as an obligation and not as a desire, right? The children do not want to go to school to learn. They want to go to school because they want to see their friends. Learning is an obligation, and when it is an obligation, it's like taxes. Nobody wants to pay taxes because it is a tax. It is imposed on the other. So if we want to be free, what we want is to give, not impose. So how is the relationship generated? How we create the relationship with learning, with supporting others? Because taxes are somewhat also for that, but it's imposed, right? Yes, it's a tax from the Roman Greek era. It is like, I impose this on you for this to work. And nowadays, how many people contribute to help a project? How many people say, there is a problem in a country or some province or whatever city, and someone says on social networks, we need so much to be able to finance such a thing. It's always finance. It's always been reached. In other words, people are willing to give. What they're not willing to do is lose their freedom. So there it goes through all the social stratums. For all the stratums, in nature, it's like that. Trees give millions of things that we don't appreciate all the time. You're breathing because the tree exists. Because the tree says, I don't need this. I give it to you. The fruit. I give it to you because it works for me. If you eat the seeds, they will go further. In nature, there exists giving and receiving without being imposed. So between us, it should be the same way. They're all entrepreneurs. What happens is that now, what is this step? We cannot go tomorrow and create a different government and say, well, now we're going to change everything. Why? Because our cells are used to something else. So we have to re-educate the cell. The cell is the one that has the memory of the information of everything that lived in the last thousands of years. Now we'll get into re-educating the cells after the commercial. Well, we continue with Matías De Stefano. You were telling me about re-educating cells. How is that? Re-educating the cell is, once again, education is taking what is inside towards the outside and understanding that each cell has the potential of the whole being, the DNA. That's where is all the information. So what is re-educating the cell? It is to do, for example, today there are many techniques and therapies. One goes to talk about ancestors, how they lived, our grandparents, great-grandparents, trying to understand the context of the traumas, many things unsaid in the historical context, things they lived through, they stormed, this and that. All of that is registered in the cell as experiences, and the cells interpret this as the current situation. The cell never interprets it as there was a war in the year 1914. The cell says, right now there is a war. It invents that for survival. It creates that because it says, I lived that in the environment, so it is registered as it could be that they will attack me again. What would it mean to re-educate them? Re-educating them would be going back to that time, do a reset, therapies of educating it with actions, like there is no hunger anymore. Resignifying the past, yes, resignifying the past. That was useful at that time. Now, there is no hunger. So I tell the cell, there is no hunger. And I eat something, you see, and I enjoy it slowly, so that the cell says, I don't have to run. Amazing. There are simple things, but there are many people who know millions of things about this, who are therapists and who help to re-educate the potential of the cell, what is inside. I imagine it must be a lot of work. Yes, a lot, yes. Now, would there be another alternative though? Like learning to invent, to create a reality beyond I accept the past, as if the cells, we ourselves enter into a context, I accept all the beliefs that I live as a reality even though they are beliefs. However, I invent such a thing and we enter into a context of invention, of I say and it is, and I don't have the need to go back to heal all that. Does it exist? Do you see that as a possibility? It is very difficult. One, because we're in the third dimension. If we were in the fifth dimension, I would say yes, but this is the third dimension. And here, there are structures and patterns. What does it mean? The future that we in the third dimension can generate is based on the tools we have in the present. And we won these tools in the past. So, what does it mean to heal? It is not saying, thank God. Healing, it is to say, I understood why this happened, and now I know what I can do with this. To become conscious of some things, not to say, I heal and that is enough, I cut and release. Those things can't be cut and released because they are in the cells. What I have to do is re-educate the cell and tell it, this is no longer happening, now this is happening. I already understood why this happened, now I'm going to do this other thing. So, it's not just cutting and I imagine something new. It is, I imagine something new and I'm going to look for what tools I have to create that new thing. The traumas, the pains, the crises are keys to consciousness. In the last 5,000 years, the human has been looking for paradise, a place where he can live well, where he can eternally be happy. If we base ourselves on how the universe works, there's never an eternally something, because the whole universe is vibration, and since it is vibration, it moves by waves, and waves have positive, negative, positive, negative. If everything were positive, it's called death. If everything was negative, it's called death, because it's like beep, it's more or less the same. So you need the beep, 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 beep to be able to move and push something. You need a crisis to create an opportunity. The issue is how we relate to that crisis, right? The issue is how aware I am of that crisis, because we normally live it like this always happens to me instead of saying, why does it happen to me? I have to analyze where it comes from to find out where the tool is. So, when I start to analyze conflicts from consciousness, they stop being a burden and they turn into something amazing. They turn into the key to transcendence. Totally. In this role that Argentina has, the territory that you mentioned in the previous program, to create that new birth, the new beginning, let's say. What do you suspect that Argentina could already be heading towards? And I don't know if it would start with a government, although Ontocracy would almost not even require it when that instant is reached. Not yet, yes. But there's a path, a bridge. How do you see Argentina crossing that bridge? What type of government? What needs to happen in between? Do you see something that can be directed through such a place? Argentina, like almost all Latin American countries, if we talk about it as they were human beings, they're all between 14 and 17-year-old. They're all adolescents or pre-adolescents. I believe Argentina is 14-year-old. What does that mean? I like that. At the age of 14, I earn my money and I spend it on candy. That's the situation we are, yes, wasting everything. Exactly. Why? Because we live in a country that is in puberty, in a country with all the hormones fighting, looking for how to earn something to be able to have what I want and not what is needed. It is normal in the process of such a young country. It's normal that we're living this. What happens is that the context of that 14-year-old Argentine girl has the voice of her father and mother who come from the 20s or 30s, yes? Who are telling her all the time what she has to do, so life goes well for her. But since the voices of the past are constantly saying, it was good for me when, yes, but it was your experience. I can create something new, exactly. So it is like the parents who say, when I was your age, yes, but it was another planetary context. It was another thing. The same thing cannot be done. Well, returning to the political issue, always taking it from left to right, and we cannot be creating anything new. Nothing new for that reason. Because we're always, and the same happens to all countries. So how can we make a transition happen so that it moves to adolescence? The process of growing up and discovering oneself and defining who I am, there has to be a context of an uncle, a grandmother, someone who comes, and instead of saying, in my time was like this and you should do this, one should ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? What would you do? Take us to look at the clear horizon. Exactly. The issue here is that we're discussing the past of how our parents lived. But in reality, I have to ask myself, what do I want to do? What do I want to live? As a country, and then what is needed is not politicians with certainties, but with doubt. What is needed is people who are up there with philosophies, not with certainties of laws. We need people who say, who are we? Who do we want to be? Exactly. How would we do it? Why don't we set up a government structure in which each municipality, each place, has a structure to self-generate their own projects, and the government moves away so it can do it? Why does the government need to move away? The government in Greece had a goal when democracy worked. It worked only 200 years in history, 3,000 years ago, never again. Democracy today is basically feudalism, where the people choose a feudal. But in reality, it does not work if one goes to the history of democracy. It really amazes me when people who study so much defend democracy when there is none. But if we go to the basis of democracy 3,000 years ago, to govern means sailing in Greek. So, what was the politician doing? Polis, a city. He would go from one city in a small boat to another city to tell, my city says they want this. And the other would come back with the message. So, then a politician who governed was basically a sailor who carried a message, an interlocutor. He was an interlocutor between different polis. But the polis had the power through an agora, in which the people went and said, we have this problem. And there were 3 or 4 who raised their hands and said, I have a solution. At that time, they raised their hands. Today, we have online platforms. They raised their hands and said, I have the solution. They managed themselves. Exactly. So they said, how can we solve this? And the person who said, I have the solution, did not carry out the project. It was carried out by chance. The names of the people who were there were written down, and the goddess of chance said who was going to carry it out, and the other would be the assistant. Less and less government. Power was removed to the point where nobody really had the power. Only the project had the power. Wow, tremendous. Matias, I would love to. And that system was ontocratic. What we're talking about is tremendous. Thanks for coming. It was a pleasure. You have an event. I have to cut it short, but you have an event now on November 11th. And how many people would there be? 3,000 people? I have no idea, more or less. 3,000 for sure. I don't know how many more there will be. Good. Matías De Stefano, where can they have the information? On the event website, yosoy2022.org. Excellent, thanks. Matias, we have an extraordinary horizon, and the question is, who do we want to be? Enough of looking at the problems or what we have been doing or what is happening. Everything is fine. Looking forward is great, but how about we give it the opportunity and the possibility of thinking who we want to be. See you next time.